Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming by. This is going to be I think, hopefully really interesting and useful deep dive into, I think, one of the novel decks that we saw at Worlds in 2022, this Liberte, Egalite, Humidite Freedom deck that was brought by a bunch of SnareBears and did quite well for a lot of them. And I've got a bunch of them on the line here, and we're going to talk through how they came about, the idea of the deck, the minutia of the refining of the deck, and then the execution of playing the deck at Worlds and post Worlds kind of thing. But let's start with introductions. So I'll start at the top of the Discord call, and Chris, if you want to introduce yourself first.
Sure. I'm AnalyzeChris, Chris F, and I brought Freedom on the day with a slightly more event-based version.
Hey, I'm Kat, also Kysra on various online platforms. I brought I think, pretty much identical Freedom build to what Skry was on.
Hi, everyone. I'm Matthew, or Skry. I mean, obviously, the list posted is by me, so that was the list I was on. But I'm excited to chat about all of the differences soon.
Yep. Hi, everyone. Jonas, TBU3K. And I brought an identical list to Matt's, and I'm excited to talk about it in the call.
Cool. Maybe it makes sense very briefly just to start with like the context for why this was the deck we went with. And I think the big thing to talk about is the pad tap and Rizeki ban and how that was shifting everyone's thinking about what they need to do runner side.
Yeah. That's lots to unpack.
Yeah. So maybe I'll go with an easier question of like, or I guess easier in real quotes here. Like why was this an idea that was initially getting tested in the group? Like this idea of freedom with endurance.
Yeah. I think we can talk about it in the context of the ban. So, I mean, before the ban, it's Lat and Hoshipko, or the list that Ashker posted, that are like the two strongest lists. One of them gets taken down. So I think you have Hoshipko sort of as the obvious successor to that. So in a sense, that's the starting point, I think. I don't know if
I think
follow up to that. Yeah.
I think we were like, we saw Hoshiko, and then, we were playing a lot of purple ourselves. We were playing some PD and some sports, and we are like, hey, it's good against, our own decks. Well, Freedom sounds pretty good. It trashes Neutralize, it trashes Seamless, all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
So I think we just tried pivoting, and we're like, what if we lose the draw?
Yeah. I think that sounds exactly right. It's like, it's what beats the stuff that's good against Boat Hoshiko.
Freedom, I think, also reasonably strong against R+, which was relevant.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, from what I remember, that was one of the main initial driving forces. Is we had found like there was a version of Reality Plus, like particularly with the kind of Prison Drago with Boom, that was proving to be pretty, even post Archive Memories ban, was proving to be kind of really solid. But then this Freedom, like one of the ideas in Freedom was it took out a lot of those tools really easily, because that deck had a hard time protecting HQ in a way that mattered for Freedom.
Yeah, I think that in the Freedom deck in particular, we were just like leaning so hard on Fermenters. I think that was the key card in the Reality Plus matchup. But yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say the thing worth saying is just like Hoshiko, I think also is just Rex R+, and so I think it's less obvious to pivot to Freedom if you think that's going to be the whole meta, but it's when you have to deal with both PD and or sports or whatever, and R+. I think it starts looking pretty good.
I was going to say on a slightly higher level look at the meta, there has been a shift from after Rizeki and pad tap from inevitable build drip econ like the Max from last year to decks that do stuff, and that's been really facilitated by endurance. And obviously, as shown in Worlds, any deck can take endurance and be successful. Uh, but layering on successful run triggers to the endurance has been, I think, the best way to use it. And Freedom does that in an awesome way with disruption from the ID, but also, you want to make runs for Hippo, you want to make runs for Dirty Laundry and Pinhole Threading and DreamNet. So it comes together in a nice package here.
Yeah, I think that's one of the, like, I don't want to go on a whole tangent about the endurance, but like the fact that like it's not quite good enough if you're just going to spend it for single accesses, but Freedom is able to take those single accesses and propel a forward game plan on it seems like one of the compelling reasons to do this in Freedom. And Hoshiko does a similar thing, just in a different way.
Totally, yeah.
So I guess, there was a lot of internal discussion, like the basic idea of, okay, endurance, Freedom, it's good against these decks, but like a lot of people, I remember even at Crown of Servers were saying, or I think that's what it was called, were saying like, oh, well, like one person brought boat Freedom and no one else, and then they finished, I think it was Cranked, finished the day saying, yeah, Freedom Boat isn't a deck. So like, what are the differences that you guys think on the deck building side that made this kind of better than the other Freedom Boats that you were kind of seeing out and about?
I think it's the Gashapons. People don't respect the Gashapons.
Gashapon is a very contentious card, even within this testing group. But I would agree to an extent that it needs.
Yeah.
the deck does need some kind of consistency, and so one of the key factors is like, how do you get that? Do you just get lots of draw with zeros? Do you get filtering effects like Gachapon? Do you just mosh away everything? And so, yeah, like there are a couple ways to make Freedom more consistent, because without the inherent draw of something like Max, you've got just the Anarch card pool to work with. You can't afford influence on Diesel for this deck, for example.
I mean, talking of the inherent draw of Max, like even Hoshiko has a lot more sort of inherent draw and inherent gas. And I think you do have to make some things that look like sacrifices in deck building to get you going fast enough to keep up. So I mean, even in our own initial drafts at the Freedom, it was too slow, and we just kept having to put in more and more acceleration till it got to the point where it was sort of good enough, I think.
I was just saying, if you look at the list, there's this draw galore. Like I consider Gashapon a little bit of a draw, or at least an accelerant. But Deucer, Steelskin, moshing, Zero. That's like, and yeah, that just a lot of that kind of compounds, and you draw into more draw 2 cards, and if you really need to, you can get through your deck in a hurry.
Yeah, I think Steelskin was maybe an unsung hero of the deck, being able to trigger off moshing and Zero, which are in themselves very good clicks. When you add a Steelskin to it, it's just an overwhelming amount of value. And on top of that, you get to see a ton of cards. So your next couple clicks are going to be really good as well.
I think this list ends up looking interesting because a lot of like the deck building advice that you often see is like, hey, if you want to see a card, run 3 of it. If you want to see it sometimes, run 2 of it. Or like if you want to see it eventually, run 2 of it. And then if you only want to see it in like a couple of tech matchups, you see it like run a 1 of. And there's a lot of 1 and 2Xs in this list, and not as many 3Xs as you typically see in, I'm going to say, like refined lists. So like how did these numbers kind of get hashed out over testing?
I actually think that it's like it's if you want to see it, but you draw through your deck like almost every game. So it's like, it's what period of the game do you need to see it by? I feel like, and so it's like the MK is sort of a tech card once, like, you need to see your boat soon. You'd play 3 if you could, but the influence maybe doesn't quite make sense. But it's like, oh, it's only by the end of the game that you really need to see the MK. So we can go short on 1. And if we see it by the end, that's soon enough.
Yeah, and like Black Orchestra like is the premier kind of breaker. You know, you got to break all sorts of code gates. Magnets are everywhere in this meta,
Yeah.
which
Mhm.
is why we went down on Botulus. But yeah, like I think that the only really key card that you want to see early in every matchup is endurance, and you're playing the maximum amount of those possible.
Yeah, so I guess like interesting, like, and I know that I'm going to try and like intentionally bring up some of the discussions we had, like the number, the zeros and the number of copies of Zero and DreamNet and like Mad Dash all seem pretty interesting. Where like I'm used to seeing people play either 2 DreamNets or 0 or 3 zeros or no zeros, and then if they're going to play 0 and Mad Dash, usually you play a 0 and multiple Mad Dashes. So like, you know, and I think there was some even discussion, like differences internally, but that was sort of, you know, this list was generally, my sense was agreed on as pretty close to optimal. So like, how do you end up on some of these like less,
Yeah.
I don't know.
It seems impossible to know like what the correct
Yeah.
combination of some of these accelerants are, because they all kind of do the same thing. My best guess, and I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, my best guess is that some of them you can use both of them in a game, so it's cool to have both. It's not like one is strictly better than the other.
Mhm.
So like you could have a game where both Zero and Gachapon are relevant.
Yeah.
So just not using one at all doesn't make a ton of sense. It's not like Zero is so much better that we need 3 of Zero and 0 of Gachapon.
Yeah. Yeah. Shout out to the process, who I think tried to mimic a bit their deck building process, I guess, when we did this. So we sat down the day before Worlds and pile built the deck out of physical cards. All of us huddled around in a circle, like a Netrunner parliament, basically. And so, so sort of sitting down and saying, like, what are the key synergies? Like, what are the key packages that you want? What is going to go in all these decks? And sort of fighting over those last 5 cards, knowing that for this type of deck, like, you really want to be at the minimum of 45. And so, yeah, you have some of these sacrifices here. It's like in my deck, I have 2-0. Do I feel good about that? No. But, you know, it's the slots are tight. So
I might actually just ask if someone doesn't mind just going over what sort of the key, like I think actually that way of talking about it, what are the key synergies in the deck, is really helpful, and I think it might be nice if we can just kind of explicitly run through those pretty quickly.
So I can talk about the first one that came to mind, and the first one is a lot of people in our group were wanting to play 3 zeros. 0 is a key early card to get, and it really rockets you through your deck. And one of the key downsides of 0 is that it's really hard to play Mad Dashes and Zeros in the same kind of deck. You know, you really don't want to hit your one of Mad Dash with 0. So one of the packages that we didn't end up settling on was we were going to play 3 zeros and then 2 Mad Dashes. That way, you know, if you lose a Mad Dash early or something like that, no big deal. Or you can mosh into the first Mad Dash, and then you just got to make sure you connect with the second one. And Chris, do you want to talk about like the Mystic package that we were talking about?
Yeah, so Mystic Mamie, there are a couple of different drip cards you have in this deck, the companions. And how much Mystic and how much Paladin is another huge debate. One of the upsides of Mystic is that we saw a lot of sports metal, and so there are a lot more opportunities for it to trigger, and your events are usually more about, running. So you can spend fewer clicks installing stuff, and fewer clicks drawing if you can just deuces all the time or dirty laundry all the time. And events, I mean, in my opinion, they're a form of click compression because you're doing like multiple things at the same time. Pinhole, even something like pinhole threading, the one cost is annoying. Excuse me, the one cost is annoying, but it can get you an endurance counter while you like get rid of an asset. You want to spend as few clicks as possible installing stuff against these really, really fast HB decks. Whereas Paladin supports a play style more like the Max style of I'm just going to install stuff at a more efficient rate and then overwhelm you with value, which doesn't really work against corps that have more proactive game plans. So my version ended up being on like labor rights, guinea pig, cards that controversial choices, but cards that allowed you to like really exploit the mystic. And I was on I think 2 mystic, 1 paladin. That way you could have like stronger bursts. The best use case for guinea pig being something like trash your hand, including a steel skin to draw with 3 credits from mystic to open up a window to contest what the corp thought was a safe scoring window. So like I think events are pretty strong, and in the NR card pool, you want to play a lot of them.
Yeah, the Mystic thing gets at another sort of synergy that was much discussed, debated, however you want to think of it, which is the sort of the number of gachapons. So it's like trading off a number of gachapons and zeros. So in the list that I posted, I have 3 gachapon because I really think that card is important in sort of finding you your first fermenter in the matchups where you need it, or finding your Yusef in the matchups where that's the key card. But then it's like, you need enough synergy. You don't want to be missing on gachapons too much. And so, the morning of, I swapped one of my liberated accounts, which is a tech card for R+, basically, into a mystic. Basically, just like, you need that. You want to play the 3 gachapon, but there is some risk there, and you want to mitigate that as well. So it's like thinking of these sort of synergy packages. I think it's same with the DreamNet. It's like these synergy packages, these cards I think can look a little funny on their own, but when you think of it sort of with the clusters of synergies, I think it makes a little more sense.
Yeah, I mean, I really like with Gashapon, what I really wanted it for. I mean, we were definitely expecting a lot of sports on the day, and I just really want to connect with either a DreamNet or a Stargate turn 1 on the Gashapon there, and just put a heck of a lot of pressure on R&D early, and make them kind of turtle up a little bit more. But yeah, you can easily whiff on Gashapons, and I think that people just cut Gashapons for like more zeros and dirty laundries and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, coming back to DreamNet, that was another super controversial card. A bunch of us didn't even run it. It feels so good when you get it down, but I think the cost is prohibitive, and the 1x is a testament to, hey, this is an amazingly powerful card, and if I see it on a gachapon and I can install it for 1 credit, that's perfect. It feels a little win more because you have to be set up and ready to run, and you can't afford necessarily a 3 credit click early in the game. So I can understand taking it out, but having played games where you get it down early from the gachapon, it's brutal, because then you can spend most of your clicks running, which is awesome.
Yeah. And you have to stay ahead on tempo. Like, you cannot fall behind on tempo as the Freedom deck.
DreamNet almost feels a little bit like a sports medal tech card, but specifically finding it on the gachapon, because you don't really often have 3 credits to install it versus sports medal.
I thought it was very good versus PD as well if you got it reasonably early, just because you can do things like click through a Fairchild 3 and all of a sudden you're still a little bit ahead on drip, because you get that extra card and you're getting slowly through your deck, and maybe you're getting an extra boat trigger or something.
Yeah, purple decks in general.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at the top 3 most represented corps from Worlds this year, it's really good against all of them. It's sports, PE, and PD. I mean, I almost, I think we kind of predicted that, but maybe not exactly. And so almost in retrospect, you want the second DreamNet. But again, the slots are so tight.
So I think it is really interesting to think about what the core of this deck is, and then what are the flexible pieces of this deck.
It's way more flexible than I thought it would be. Even stuff like win cons. People are running like no Mad Dash or no Stargate. I don't know. It's funny, the things that end up being the same in the deck, which is kind of like endurance, 3 fermenter, and the breaker suite, and that's about it. Even the tech cards, people are not always running 2 Pinhole. You know, some
Yep.
people like Stone Ship, some people like what's the other one influence one?
So can I talk about Pinhole real quick?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I really think that Pinhole is one of the things that is important and kind of keeps the deck together, because, you know, what you're trying to do is you're trying to assemble enough endurance and, you know, Stargate and stuff like that in order to create credible central threats. And what Pinhole does is it nukes a Tranquility Grid, or it nukes a Rashida or something like that. It sets them back a turn, essentially. And so it allows you to, you know, drip your fermenters or drip your companions or whatever, and assemble a board state that's better than the corpse. And, you know, a lot of what Pinhole does is just slows it down. You know, obviously it's good against Drago stuff, but hitting a Rashida is probably like the number one you know, big sell for me.
Yeah,
Totally.
you can get in anywhere with endurance, but you can't get in anywhere over and over and over again. You know,
Yeah.
you kind of have to like stockpile this stuff. You're not a shaper who can, you know, contest a remote efficiently every third turn or whatever, and not see a big like hit to your tempo. You need to
Yeah.
make sure that you're not just willy-nilly using endurance counters or wasting your money, and Pinhole is just the cheapest possible way. Add on to that you're trashing stuff with virus counters. You're not spending real money to trash the stuff in the remote.
Mhm.
So a click with no credits to set them back a turn is fantastic.
Totally. I mean, your core problem is you're too slow, right? I mean, eventually you have later other problems, but your core problem is you're too slow. And then just like, yeah, trashing that Trent grid for, you know, slow PD down, make them click for credits, or, you know, dealing with the Rashida in a remote that you don't have boat yet for, is just, it's like slowing the game down in the early game is so strong for this deck.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess back to the core, it's like I think everyone was totally on board with the icebreakers: 2 Blorch, 1 MK, 1 Clip, 2 Yusuf. Everyone was totally on board. 3 Fermenter, super important. 2 Stargate, everyone on board. To the hardware, of course, 2 Boat and 3 Hippo. I think that was uncontroversial.
Yeah,
And
I think Hippo is one of the under talked about cards that like is one of the reasons to be Anarch at all, basically. And Endurance Anarch in particular.
Yeah, it feeds into that idea that you only have limited resources to break stuff, so just break it once.
Yep.
And it's good with, I mean, it's like this is the one of the downsides we found with the Hoshiko when we were testing is, you know, it's like you need the Hippo, but you also need enough credible centrals pressure to make them spread their ice around, to make Hippo good, to make Hippo make runs cheap. And so, but against Hoshiko, a lot of time you can sort of leave HQ and archives completely uniced, and you then have enough ice for the remote and for R&D for the Stargate pressure. And there's sort of no credible, you know, but Freedom sort of inverts that, trashes your Audacity, trashes your what's
Seamless.
it called? Seamless. Thank you. Out of hand, spreads the ice around a bit more, makes the Hippo better, helps you get more bow counters, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you never cut any of the hippos. They're very important.
Yeah.
They're never even moshing them, really. Like,
Yeah.
unless you really need to find a boat or something like that. It's just losing a hippo is rough.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. To the events: 2 Laundry, 3 Moshing, 3 Steelskin, 3 Gamble was set. Some people played a 3rd Laundry, but 2 of them was agreed on.
Wait, did everyone agree on laundry? I mean, I
I
thought there
don't
were some
know
people
how
who
many
didn't run
people
them.
agreed on laundry, but
Oh,
like,
really?
I think that it's, well, I think that it's very good, but I don't know. Like, I'm certain that you could defend cutting it for, you know, switching to more liberated or whatever. Like, it's not, I would say, essential.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
It's very good value with all your run triggers, but it's also a bit of a tech card for what you think the meta would be. I think given a sports heavy, like a sports and purple heavy meta, it is very correct to have some.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then maybe the 2 Paladin, and then everything else. Wow, that's a lot of cards left. That
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that only 1 paladin is necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things about this list, and maybe why no one else, like there. I know there's a couple of other people that are like, "Oh, I brought a Freedom really similar," but a lot of people felt like their Freedom was pretty far away, and I think part of the reason might be it's really hard to figure out. Like, there's actually not that many core slots, and there's a lot of tweaking you have to do for the meta you're anticipating, and so this reads more as this is like an anticipation of a meta and calling that you can put in the right, it's funny to call something like liberated account a tech card, but it in this meta
it really was.
It really is a tech card. Yeah.
You could not really afford to play it against purple, but against R plus it was just so many credits and it felt perfect.
Yeah.
One card that I was a little surprised that made it into this final list was Citadel.
Yeah, that was there's maybe a few 45th cards.
Yeah.
That's one of them where it's like I had it brought it to the event space. Hadn't decided if I was going to play it, but fearing some amount of, it's okay against R plus. It's not good.
Mm-hmm.
It's good against CTM, which is a okay matchup for you, but not amazing depending on your draw. And then it's good against the combo Ob, which we thought could make an appearance, and so that's enough stuff.
So what I like, we were all, listening to Eric Keelback, and he was saying, "Oh, I cannot confirm or deny that everybody's working on this Acme list," and he's bullshitting us. Like, okay, so what you're saying is we might need a Citadel to deal with all of these, FTPs and data wards and crap, and so yeah, that's why I did it, is because Eric was being a little shitter.
Yeah.
I think it's a testament to how flexible it is as a tech card. Tech cards are usually like, hey, I can deal with tags. Hey, I can deal with meat damage. This deals with both. And it's very powerful in that regard. And, in a deck like an Anarch deck where you have moshing and zero, you have a little bit of leeway to include tech cards that can just get moshed or zeroed away. And, instead of including something hyper specific like a clot, get something like a Citadel Sanctuary, which can do a lot. Especially in a tournament as big as Worlds, where you may see off meta decks in the first couple rounds, and you're going to feel pretty silly if you have this hyper tech deck for just the top tables, and you get punitive or something.
Totally, it's so strong in the matchups it's good in that it is really it's kind of silver bullety in that way. But I like the way you put it. It's like both silver bullety and flexible. It's like silver bullet for 3 different matchups.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, maybe we want to talk a little bit, before the call, Kat was saying like, oh, I've seen people try this deck and not have a lot of success with it. And I feel like I've seen that around a little bit. So what were like the big piloting ideas, I think, that you guys kind of discovered in playtesting or discovered at Worlds, or just kind of talked about that you feel like sometimes people might make mistakes on, or just like are maybe a little less obvious? Or maybe we should start with the obvious ones and then go to the less obvious ones.
The classic one that people don't do when coming from boat Hoshiko to Freedom is you hippo, punch a hole in HQ and run it 4 times and clear the hand out. And that's like an extremely good line as Freedom and a not very good line as Hoshiko, and is like very important to keep just like you run the hand so much more as Freedom, and I think people undervalue that coming from Hoshiko. I don't know if other people have thoughts on that line. That's one of my favorite Freedom lines, is punch a hole in HQ, run it 4 times.
Yeah, I mean, I'll at least run it to like, until I get a Freedom trigger and, maybe see an agenda or something like that, but definitely shrink it and make them build back up on HQ.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe a good way to think about this is like, what do you like? Let's say we'll maybe go through this exercise with like 3 different, like against sports metal. Like, what are you hoping to do in the first couple of turns, and then how are you hoping to transition into the mid game against sports metal?
Draw Yusuf. Draw Yusuf turn 1.
So good. Yeah.
And draw Yusuf. Draw Stargate.
Okay. Yeah. So.
Against sports metal, your accesses are way better. So you do want to spend less time setting up. even if it means like not getting amazing unsuccessful run value every turn. You can't just tunnel vision on that though, because even if you're getting points throughout the first 4 or 5 turns, if you're not slowly accruing value enough so that you can get an endurance down, even really dumb gear checking ice can lock you out in the late game. So it's a weird balance between I'm Freedom and I call the shots and I do all the central disruption, and well, I still need to be responsible and make some money and slowly build up my rig.
Something that I sometimes see Freedom players do against sports that I disagree with is leaving the econ like trank grids, and it's like that's one of the best reasons to be Freedom is you can trash the trank grid for a fermenter counter or a USEF counter, and it like slows it down. It allows you to find the time to do those things that Chris is describing, which is like get enough set up, spend the time drawing, which is time to find your boat and then your Stargate, and then sort of lock down the game.
Yeah, I think maybe a way to think about it is like Sports Metal does need Tranquility Grid to either get them the card draw or the credits. So like by trashing the Tranquility Grid, you're buying yourself at least an extra turn kind of play.
Exactly.
So
I think that's.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead,
That's
Jones.
one of the big things that I like about the deck is that Fermenter has a heck of a lot of value outside of just that 2 credits per turn, where you can, lose 2 credits off of your Fermenter, but you can also trash a Seamless Launch or Tranquility Grid or something like that. And, even if you don't have a Yusuf down or anything like that, it still allows you to have that turn 1 pressure, running with a Gashapon on the remote, and they let you in because it's just a Tranquid, and all of a sudden you pop Gashapon, find Fermenter, and trash it, set them back. So yeah, I think that using virus counters off Fermenter is pretty huge.
Yeah, cool. So I guess let's swap that exercise a little bit and say, okay, let's say you sit down and your opponent's playing Precision Design. How does that change how you're thinking about playing your first couple of turns and change how you're thinking about the late game? Or does it change, I guess, is the other counterfactual.
I mean, trashing the trank grid even more important in that matchup, to be honest. That deck is poor.
Yeah, do you feel like, I guess one question might be like, do you feel like you spend more time like drawing and setting up against like Precision Design versus Sports Metal, or do you feel like those matchups kind of play fairly similarly in terms of your balance there?
I think that the Stargate is so good against sports and is much more of a late game closer against PD. PD is much weaker to the hand pressure as well, I feel, because they hold this hand of operations and agendas and sort of are making your accesses worse by forcing you to access seamless launches over and over. And so you really kind of invert that and do the thing Chris said where you make your accesses better by being Freedom because you trash the operations. And so they don't really have enough money or enough ice to defend HQ as well as R&D and the remote in a way that lets them score. In a sense, I think PD is probably your best matchup as this deck.
It's one of the reasons that we settled on Freedom, because especially the potency of next activation command, which is a literal free trash for you if you see it in HQ, and it's kind of the only thing that keeps you out of the remote as an endurance deck. Yeah, what I was going to ask, which is something I have a lot of trouble with as Freedom against PD, is knowing when to try to clear the remote and contest the never advanced threat, meaning you're not quite sure if it's going to be an agenda or if it's going to be some kind of econ card in the remote, and you only have so many tools to get in. Like, at what point in the game are you being aggressive and trying to clear out the remote, and to what extent are you just doing Freedom things and reducing the value of HQ by destroying everything in it? You only have 2 pinhole threadings, right? So how do you use those wisely?
You're like a classic Netrunner deck in a way, right? So you're pressuring different places until they armor up, and then when they armor up in one place, somewhere else is more vulnerable. And so I think in the early game, you pressure the remote hard until they sort of have enough there to keep you out. Because trashing the Trank Grid is so good, or trashing Rashida is so good, and a lot of their ice is pretty bad against you. So it's like if you run click 1, sort of like no fear most of the times, especially early game before the drafter turns on.
Yeah, a
And so
little bit.
yeah, a little bit of fear, sure, but yeah, you're right. Sure, maybe you should have more fear. I don't know, but in general, I think especially turn one, like um, making them armor up somewhere hard, and then you just have enough pressure on each server, I think, to then pivot. So it's like, oh, they've overcommitted on the remote, clear out the hand. They've overcommitted on protecting the hand, drop the Stargate. And so I think
Yeah.
you just have you have a lot of answers, right? And so it's a little reactive maybe, but you have answers to what ails you against PD.
Yeah. So I guess it doesn't really provide any sort of, like strategy for like do this versus certain decks, where it's more of a, learn how to, play good net runner and play solid fundamentals and poke holes and stuff like that.
Yeah. Or maybe the recommendation is like make sure you're pressuring. Maybe
Yeah.
that's a little different than some other runners at the moment, which are taking a little more time to sit back and get set up first. Where I think Freedom with a USEF or fermenter down is much better at pressuring.
Yeah, I think that's a good contrast to
So
like
I guess. So I guess you want to like pressure smart. So like you want to make sure that when you're pressuring, you have you have 3 clicks available so that you can blank Fairchild, or you have Hippo up, or you have Gashapon ready to bail you out in case you need to get lucky on finding a breaker or something like that. Like make sure that you maximize your contingencies, I guess.
Totally. That's a good point that I'm maybe taking a little for granted in this discussion. Or it's the same thing too. It's like, especially if you use a Hippo on a central, much better for that to be click 1 than click 4 and you get 1 access before they install the next ice, like
Yeah.
You do have really limited tools here and you need to make the most of them.
This reminds me of playing against purple decks with endurance, and yeah, you're building up endurance counters, but you also have the threat of knack, so you want to build up a lot of money with fermenter and don't be sparing with the endurance counters in those situations, because you never know when the knack's going to land, and all you have left is your cash and your really inefficient bin breakers.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point against both like the snack sports, the soccer sports, and the PD. Is your endurance in a lot of matchups is for the remote, but in those matchups your endurance is more for the centrals, for exactly the reason that you say, which is like actually you need your money for the remote because they're only going to go for safe scores most of the time.
Yeah, so I guess maybe it's also worth sort of starting to wrap this up and ask like, well, let's ask the first question. I'll come back to the second one. The list we haven't mentioned at all, of course, is the corp list that a bunch of you also brought, which is the AgInfusion deck. How did this, I know this was tested against the AgInfusion deck, and notably this doesn't include any of the many tech cards that were listed against the AgInfusion deck, other than, I guess, Hippo. So how did people feel like that matchup played out?
It can work. I think you have a few cards that are actually really important against AgInfusion in Hippo, in Stargate, and in pinhole threading. Now, pinhole threading is a little difficult because you need an open remote to run to, but I think the general play pattern here against the Ag is don't run multiple servers. Pick a central that you can drill into and only run when you're pretty sure you can Hippo the outside ice. Because if you run a server and it doesn't work out, what you've done is you've left an Ag target open, and all these ice are like pretty bad to hit. Except for like wave or whatever. So if you can get a wave res, that's fine. Give Ag all the money they want. Just try to get in there and trash the key pieces, trash the Trieste, trash the divert power. That's something that Freedom can do that a lot of other people can't do. And try to find the Loki.
Yeah, so yeah, that's definitely a good point. And a lot of people, well, some people were debating putting in hunting grounds instead of a pinhole threading or deuces or something. But the fact that you have Hippo up kind of shuts down a lot of AgInfusion until they have the full combo available. And Stargate's good for trashing key pieces and making sure that they're not assembling their combo if you can. But as somebody who's played the AgInfusion a lot, I know that I want to guard R&D, but you also like your fermenters, your other virus counters and stuff like that, are also very important. So you can do things like, just trash with your virus counters all the time. And like oftentimes you don't even need to lay down a Stargate because they'll just, boop you away when you do a Stargate run. So yeah, virus counters very important in that matchup, in my opinion. Well, boat's probably the most important, but mull for boat.
I think in our internal testing, it was maybe like 55% AgInfusion favored. But I mean, 45% or 40% or however you want to think of it as is still pretty good for Freedom or any Reg Anarch, I would say. For all those reasons you said. I mean, a lot of it comes down to too. It's like if you ever steal the longevity serum out of that deck, your win percentage goes up to probably like 60% as the runner. I think just because as the AgInfusion, you always lose an agenda early game, pretty much. Mm-hmm. And then if they can find if they ever touch the longevity serum, it's very hard to keep them out from where the agendas. They're in your hand, and it's like, oh, they have a 60% steal your oboe, and it's like if they don't win from that, fine. But if they get that longevity serum, then you're in serious trouble.
Yeah, longevity is good to steal, but also I feel like even more is when they can actually steal the oboe. Like that's like because you need to be able to have that late game where you can just throw down oboes naked or something like that, or not naked, but like with one AgInfusion protection left. And if they steal an oboe, then your end of deck game plan is a little bit different because you have to sneak at least one agenda that's not for net damage of protection. So you have to sneak that longevity. So if you lose a longevity and an oboe, then it's pretty much good game for you.
Cool. I think the other thing that maybe we'll sort of start the wrap up with is, were there any games that you got? And it's been a few weeks since Worlds now. Any games you remember as standing out for having interesting plays or lines, or just other things you want to shout out while playing this Freedom deck at Worlds, I guess.
I can go first because I've thought about this a bit. Sorry to keep jumping in, but I just don't want to leave us with too much dead air. I mean, I think my favorite game where the deck did the thing it was supposed to do, and I mentioned this in the write-up as well, I think is the game that's on stream against Beblum on Beblum's extremely cool like tempo or rush ob list. And it's just like all the things that I feel like are the features of this Freedom list really shine. So it's like the Yusef comes down early, so we're pressuring the hand. The deck doesn't quite have enough ice to protect all the centrals well because they really want to be rushing in the ob remote, and it like buys you time. Yeah, both penholes I got pretty early trashed me 2 Rashidas where I couldn't get into the remote, slowing the game down. Eventually the boat comes down and the Stargate comes down, and so you're just like you're like a broom, like sweeping pressure across all of the servers. And it's just like it's a close game. I think it was like 7-5 or something like that, but in a sense I think if you watch it is less close than the point value would seem, and it's just like you have this forward tempo and the corpse on the back foot the entire time, which I think is a really good feeling when you're playing this deck.
I actually also played against their exact same list. I played against Ben Blum earlier on in Swiss, and I got pretty much steamrolled because if you don't get the early use of the early enough run triggers and stuff like that, they can just completely steamroll you and fast advance over your gear check early. And so I think that I was a little bit sad about not being able to connect with like pinholes or something like that, but I definitely felt like it was a very fast deck, and If when the Freedom deck is rolling, it rolls really well against pretty much that style of deck.
It speaks to the kind of fragility of this econ and disruption system, that things have to kind of fall into place at the right time against whatever matchup you're playing. The game I was going to talk about wasn't a game that I played, but I believe it was in the cut. And I think it was either Gronkov, Rob, or Toby against another ob deck. But this was one of the ob decks that was the kind of asset ob, relying on urban renewal and recursion to try to just slowly chip away at the runner's health and resources until they have to give up. And Freedom just doesn't worry about that. And it felt kind of bad watching it, because Freedom didn't have a lot of difficult decisions to make. There were just trash literally anything you find. You can pinhole in, you can endurance in, the remote, and then once 3 spin doctors are out and there's 2 urbans in the bin, I'm not sure how Ob wins that. So it just felt like a very comfortable matchup that feeds into Freedom's strengths.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, because that's like a matchup where I think Hoshiko could actually really have a bit of a hard time, and that because it just lacks some of those interactive tools and tempo in the same way. So Freedom solves some of those like difficult or unusual problems that corps are trying to present, in lieu of the fact that they can't just make an impenetrable set of R&D HQ in a remote anymore, with endurance being in the meta. Kat, anything you want to shout out? Otherwise, I'll start the wrap up.
I think for me, the game that I found very interesting was against Dr. Awkward in the tiebreaker. I was playing against the Bladder CTM deck as Freedom, and I found it to be a very interesting matchup, because I think playing as Freedom, you just find Bladder where it's so much less threatening, because it's only 1 virus counter to crash, and even if it does fire, your deck is so adapted to using 0 that it was just giving me free steel skin triggers. So I think the strength of Freedom in a lot of ways comes from its ability to trash things with the viruses that just gives you like different paths and different like openings that you don't see in other runners. And it's also very difficult for a corp to adapt to if they are not used to playing against it.
Cool. All right. Well, I think I want to say thanks to all of you for giving me some of your time fairly early on a Sunday morning, at least for those of us in the US. And thanks for talking about this. I think people will really like this. I thought this was a really interesting, and I thought good level of conversation. So thank you all. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Well, otherwise, thanks everyone for watching, and I will hope you enjoyed.
Thanks for having us, Jeff.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.